Boy, do we have a treat for you today. This is a guest we have been trying to get this audience, or trying to get to come talk to this audience for quite some time. Never thought it was going to be possible, but we were able to get on Dr. Dan Siegel. He is basically not only one of the founders or one of the innovators or one of the leading voices in parenting throughout this country and the world, but also just of child development and better understanding adolescents and kids, and how to parent them differently and how to help them be the most healthy humans they can become. Dan Siegel, he's the founder and director of education of the Mindsight Institute. He's the founder and co-director of Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. He's a graduate of Harvard Medical School, completed his postgraduate training at UCLA, specializing in pediatrics and adults, adolescents, and child psychiatry. He was trained in all the attachment research and narrative analysis through National Institute of Mental Health, research training fellowship focused on how relationships shape our autobiographical ways of making sense of our lives and influence our development across the lifespan. He's written 15 books. 5 of those have been New York Times best-selling books, like No Drama Discipline, The Whole Brain Child, Parenting from the Inside Out. I mean, so many great books, The Power of Showing Up. And today you are in for a treat. I mean, I'm telling you, get ready to learn so much about every stage of your kid's life and how to help them. He's going to give you practical tools about how to help your adolescents, your teenagers, and make those years fantastic. He's also going to talk about the classic debate of nature versus nurture. What's doing all these things are going to be discussed in this podcast today, and it's going to be fantastic. So we had such a great time doing this interview today. I hope you enjoy it equally as much. And oh man, if please share this with anybody you know, because it is a treat to get to hear him talk about this stuff. The podcast, give us a 5-star review if you want to. That'd be fantastic. Leave us a comments about how you enjoy his interview today. That would just mean the world to us. So I hope you're able to sit back and enjoy this interview today.
Welcome to the Art of Raising Humans.
The Art of Raising Humans is a podcast designed to support, equip, and encourage parents on how to create long-lasting, deeply connected relationships with their kids that's free from fear and shame. Come join us on the journey. Hello, and welcome to The Art of Raising Humans. I'm Kyle.
Hi there, welcome. I'm Sara.
And this is a big day for us, right?
Yes, we're very excited.
So excited. Lately, Sara, we have had the honor of having some really awesome people on this podcast, but today was a day I don't think we thought was going to happen. Did you?
No, just hoping,
wishing. I guess. But one of the people who's been so influential in our lives on how we see our kids, how we see our kids' behavior, how we understand ourselves, has really been at the forefront of all that for us is Dr. Dan Siegel.
Yes.
And without further ado, I want to introduce, this is Dr. Dan Siegel. Thank you for coming on our podcast today.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Kyle. It's great to be
Dr.
here.
Siegel, what I wanted to open up with,
and you can call me Dan.
What I want to open up with, Dan, is lots of times when parents come to us for help all throughout the world, and they're seeking out, they're wanting to somehow help their kids with their behavior, their big blow-ups, their anxiety, whatever it might be, right? One of the first things I'm trying to do in that first meeting is help them change their view of this outside-in model and more do this inside out approach, right? And so I was really curious when I knew you were going to come to, how does Dan do that? Like, how do you pitch it when you're talking to families and they're like, we want him to stop doing this, stop doing that. And you're like, oh, they're really outside in people. How do you talk to them and help them see it differently?
Yeah, great question. First of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. And it's an honor to be here with you. I think the journey, and this is what I say to parents, the journey to parenting is such a wonderful and challenging opportunity because it's probably the hardest job in the world. And in some ways, it's the most important job, because we're raising our children, we're raising the next generation. And whether you think about it personally or think about it for the large public thing about being human here and raising humans, it's a big deal. So what I say is that, as you, I think in your philosophy approach it that way, the best resource for parenting is the
Yeah.
parent
Yep.
themselves. And so then you say, well, where are you getting your ideas? Where are you getting your behavioral responses to your kids? And it's from the inside, whatever you've held, not only from what you experienced as a child yourself, but then how you made sense of what you experienced. So I begin with that. And some people go, what do you mean by making sense? And I go, well, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about, and I wrote a book by the name
Yes.
Parenting from
Great
the
book.
Inside Out,
Great book. Yep.
which is with Mary Hartzell. And what we wanted to do, Mary and I, was to make sure parents realized that the inner resource that is themselves was more than just how they were going to manage behavior. So that's how I start. I said, sometimes even if we were raised where our parents just dealt with our externally visible behaviors, our actions, what we said, our interactions with people, giving us rules, a behavioral approach, there's a validity to that, research shows, but it misses the opportunity to see inside, see inside, to look
Yeah.
at your feelings, your thoughts, your memories. All that we can say is the mind, and the mind is what drives our own behavior. So how would you as a parent, I say to them, like to get to know your own inner world so that if you started parenting from the inside out, you might find there are things you love that you want to keep on doing, and that's
Yep.
great. 2 thumbs up. You might find there are some things that you're not so certain about, maybe 1 thumb up. And you might find there are things you don't really like, 1 thumb down, or things you really, really can't stand that burst out of you that you can't believe you did. And maybe your parents did that too, 2 thumbs down. So I said, you actually can't change the past. So some parents say, why would I look at the past if I can't change it? And I go, because while you can't change the past, you can change how you make sense
Yeah.
now of how the past back then affected you, meaning what did you experience and what did you learn about how to deal with that experience? So that's how we're going to liberate you. And that's what I say. And liberate means that we're in a prison sometimes we don't even know. And what parents have, and you've probably experienced it yourself, is the ability to empower themselves to create a new way of parenting that they didn't even know was even possible, even though it was in their dreams of how to
Yeah. I
be.
love that. I love
I
that.
love that.
So that's kind of how I
Yes.
invite people on the journey, the inside out journey. And, I'll tell you, Tina and I, wrote 4 parenting books.
Yes.
Tina Payne Bryson. We never would have written any of those books if the book Parenting from the Inside Out that Mary Hartz and I wrote wasn't already out there. Because, and Tina shares this view,
Yeah.
you've got to
Yep.
start from the inside. So that book already existed. And then we said, well, what else would be helpful to parents? So that's our 4 books.
And we kind of do that. We tell
ponder that
parents that
question.
we've got a real parent first approach, and what we love about our journey, Dan, is that we really feel like our kids, once we embrace this idea that you're talking about, we saw our kids' issues, conflicts, all the idiosyncrasies that make them our kids as opportunities for us to grow as people and as humans. And that's what they've done. They've shaped us and made us into better people because we embraced that kind of inside out model. Yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. That's
It's
beautiful.
it's been so rewarding because we've been on this journey long enough now with our kids being, not 2-year-olds. We've seen it play out, and I've loved it. And
Yeah.
one piece that I really love, that's a real big part of our parenting journey, and that I've appreciated from what you bring, is about connection and how the important role of connection in brain development and all those kinds of things. And I wanted to ask you if we're thinking about, I'm trying to figure out how to word my question, but if we're thinking about how important connection is, and at the same time, you hear concerns about snowflake parenting and my child, how do I build resiliency in my child? How do we do this? And what does that look like in the day-to-day of my parenting journey? How do I do that in the day-to-day with them to build that resiliency, to build that connection and hold all those things together? I hear some parents feeling like it's an either or,
Yeah.
but how do those things look?
Well, and Dan, to jump on that too, I think Sarah and I were talking about before this interview about how in our childhood, lots of times when these big emotions came, there was a lot of stuffing it. There was a lot of like, get over that, move through that. And somehow our brains were wired to believe that made us tougher. That made us more resilient. And then you come along and other people like you saying, no, it's through connections, through understanding those feelings. And then sometimes like Sarah's saying, it looks like we're raising these kids who are just constantly overwhelmed by their feelings and can't make any, so I would love to hear, I'm sure you hear that a lot from people, that this kind of stuff leads to
Yeah.
weaker kids or snowflake kids,
Right. Well, these are great concerns and questions. What I start with is that
Mm-hmm.
word connection has a wonderful way where you can invite parents to realize that the relational connection they establish from how you communicate, how you connect, how you're really present for your child in how you're interacting with them, that relational connection shapes the connections inside the brain that are going to develop in your child's brain. So what I say is, if you want to be influencing the brain development of your child in a positive way, and they go,
Yeah.
yeah, I do. I say, well, relational connections build neural connections in the brain for things like resilience or inner understanding or understanding other people or making sense of your life and the story of your life being flexible and empowering for you, or it's restricted and you feel bad about who you are. So I said, it's up to you. Your relational connection is exactly what will shape the brain connections that are underneath those signs of well-being and resilience. So once you say that, then they go, well, then what kind of connections do I
Yeah.
need to be offering? And the answer, is kind of simple. And I made up a word called
Yep.
Mindsight
Yep.
a long time ago for, the ability to see the
Yeah.
sea inside, to be able to sense your emotions, your memories, your thoughts, your intentions, your motivations. All of that is part of what's called the mind. So the skill set to see that, we as parents are the first teachers of our children. So it's the basis of what some people call social intelligence. It's the basis for emotional intelligence. And in terms of the question, kids are now overwhelmed by their feelings. It isn't just that you're telling them, be obsessed with
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you're feeling. It's to use those feelings as a sign for what matters in your life and what's going to drive your behavior. So, for example, children who have parents who talk to them about their emotions don't just have more awareness of their emotions. First of all, they do have more awareness of their emotions. They have more awareness of the emotions of others. And what they do is they learn with that awareness to regulate their emotions
Yeah.
more effectively and to be able to communicate with other people about their emotional world in a more mutually rewarding way. So kids have more mutually connecting relationships, and their relationship with their inner self is, enhanced because they can feel a feeling. And, think about the
Yeah.
analogy of surfing. Instead of just being a kid who is walking on the shore and watching the waves and is scared of them because they don't know what to do with them, your child will learn how to surf. They don't have to be afraid of emotions that come in as big waves. They can ride those waves. you know? And so, yeah, you may see a kid who's able to say, right now, with what's going on at school, I feel really sad because so many of the kids are, hurting each other as bullies on their phones. And it makes me feel really isolated, and that really feels bad. Your child may be able to articulate that. So you may say, oh my God, they're so
Yeah.
preoccupied with their emotions. But actually, by being able to have the clarity of naming the emotion, they can frame it in a story that makes sense. They can also tame it in the sense of it's out of control. They can come to regulate it and then work with it. So instead of just going along with the social pressure to be bullying other kids, they have the feeling this doesn't feel right. They act on that feeling. I'm
Yeah.
not going to
Yep.
do that bullying. And they can be a beacon of strength in their peer
Yeah, I
community.
love that. That's such a great picture.
Yeah, it is.
That's such a great picture. And I think it's what we have really desired for our kids too, Dan, the way you're wording that is really this ability to understand the feeling. Like in the past, we were told to just push it down, almost like ignore it. And then you can then go do that thing and not be overwhelmed. But really, it just made us less connected to the feeling, less we understood ourselves less, almost like we tried to just like not listen to
Exactly.
ourselves and just go do it anyway. And I think that is the nuance in our culture that keeps getting missed. Like all too often you hear like gentle parenting or snowflake parenting, those kind of things. It really does seem like they're still getting caught up in this dichotomous argument of either the feeling is controlling you or you're just, stuffing the feeling, and we're really wanting them to be able to
Exactly.
understand the feeling. So then they can, like you talk about in Whole Brain Child in that book, they can really then integrate the feeling and then do something about it.
Exactly. Because, what is a feeling? A feeling has to do with three big things. It has to do with your response of your body. So just letting your kids be in touch with what is their heart feeling, what's their gut feeling, what their tightening of their muscles, their jaw, all these feelings, a lump in your throat. Having your child be aware of those bodily sensations and knowing what they mean, incredibly important for inner strength. So your body isn't just a vehicle to carry your brain around. It's actually a source of deep wisdom and intuition.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Emotions are about body. The second thing is emotions are almost always about something that's meaningful.
Yeah.
Something significant happening. So if you're ignoring your emotions, you're not ignoring your body, you're ignoring what's meaningful in your life. Right? And the third thing is emotions are often either directly or indirectly related to our interpersonal relationships or relationships with nature or with God or this higher sense of connection, something larger than just our skin encased body. So it's about relationships, it's about meaning, it's about the body. You couldn't get three more fundamental aspects of what's significant in our lives. So yeah, absolutely. I'll give you a quick little story. When we were raising our kids, we were at a party and, one of my colleagues who's also a physician, he says to me, he wasn't in my field. He says, you talk to your kids too much about their feelings. You're going to make them neurotic. I said, I hear you. And in his family, I noticed he never talked to his kids about his feelings. Well, when our kids who were good friends ultimately came forward in life, they had a very different way initially of knowing how to handle themselves. I'll just say our son, who's a musician now, Alex Siegel, you can hear what he did with this ability to be aware of his feelings. Check out his music, but you'll see, for both him and his sister, we really were encouraging them to develop an inner compass, which meant, no matter what's happening with your peers or what's happening in your decisions in school or whatever, you have an inner compass that gives you a feeling in your gut, in your heart, way beneath and before, and in some ways more fundamental to what your higher cognitive upper brain is thinking, right? So they could use this inner compass to say, I know my friends are doing this and that, but my heart and my gut are telling me, it's just a feeling like a clamping up. This isn't right. So both our kids had this ability. And for our friend's son, he ended up, dropping out for a while because he was so not prepared with an inner compass. He had to develop in his own way. And now he's got it, but it wasn't because of what his parents did. It was almost in spite of them. And I understand what my friend was saying to me, you're going to make your kids neurotic. He was in a field that had zero to do with emotions and all was about, surfacey stuff. And, we find that in science too. There are some people in science who act like, and I certainly found this in medical school, like the mind is not real. I was once in a debate, believe it or not, in psychiatry, of, should psychiatrists learn about emotions? And the proposal was no, because there's no evidence that emotions are real. And this is what my debate partner said, the room was full of people watching us. We were the young, upcoming generation. And I got up and I thought, oh my God, what do you say when the leading thing is there's no scientific evidence that emotions are real? So I just got up there and I said, I feel really sad.
Nice.
And I
Yeah.
sat down and then I said, okay, I got to say something more. So I got back up to the microphone and I said, you know something? I don't know any of research evidence that shows that my debate opponent actually exists. So I don't know what else I can do. Show me the evidence that says you are real.
Yes.
So we have this thing called emotions. So the cool thing about emotions is when you get comfortable with them, they allow you to live a more whole
Yes.
brain
Yeah.
life, if you will. You can use your thinking and logic on your left side. You can use the more autobiographical, body felt things on your right side. And Tina and I try to talk about this in Whole Brain Child, and
Yeah.
both are important. You don't want to favor one or the other. But if you're ignoring emotions, you're ignoring on purpose, in a sense, and then it goes on automatic pilot. One of the most
Yeah.
important
Mm-hmm.
feeling qualities of being alive. And even if you just say, if a person could say, look, Dad, Mom, I'm feeling really sad about something. I don't know what it is. You as their parents could say, tell me
Yeah.
more about that. And they go, I don't know, at school, this is going on, that's going on. I don't know why I feel so sad.
Yeah.
Whatever. They're able to use that emotion as an opportunity in
Yep.
terms of relationship to share with you something very vulnerable inside. I'm feeling something that's
Yep.
pretty intense, doesn't feel good, and I want to share it with you. And I don't understand. I'm not in control of it in the sense of I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I'm clamping it down. I'm
Yeah.
just being with it. And when we're being with an emotion like that, it develops
Yeah.
closeness. And you as parents can say, tell me
Yeah.
more about it. I want to know more. You don't have to have answers. You don't have to solve problems. You can just be present. As Tina and I like to say in Power of Showing Up,
Yeah.
you just show up and you don't have to solve the sadness. You can be showing up for
Yeah.
that
That's
sadness.
great. Yeah.
All right, I want to bring it to another uncomfortable emotion. As you were talking, I was
Yes.
thinking about how I
Yeah.
think it's a little bit of a struggle sometimes for parents. And I felt this too when it's like, let's move to anger. And you think, okay, I want to let my kid be mad because that's a common one to shut down, right? You want to shut the kid. One way of thinking is we
Yeah.
got to shut down the anger. But if you're thinking, okay, if these feelings are important, anger's important, but then you get this big dysregulated child, and I think sometimes parents are then thinking, now what? I've got a very mad child here and I'm trying to let them feel mad and then it's like what now do I do? What? Because it feels even though sadness is uncomfortable, I think there's a piece that goes, "Oh, I can be here with you in the sadness." But anger feels different and is experienced different as parents and out in society and
It's true.
things.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious what about your thoughts and
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's so great you're asking about that, Sarah. Thank you. I just wrote a book with 4 colleagues on for therapists. So it's not I
Yeah.
mean, you can read it, but it's not like a easy to read book. But we talk about 3 core emotions that are emerging from deep, deep
Okay.
in the brain in an area called the
Mm-hmm.
brain stem. So Tina and I talk about the downstairs and upstairs brain. This would be the deepest part of the downstairs brain. So it'd be
Yeah.
like the basement. And so there are a bunch of networks there, but 3 of the networks relate to some of the emotions that people might say are uncomfortable. So one is anger, like you're talking about. Another is separation, distress, and sadness. And the third one is fear, right? And, when these emotions arise from the brainstem, so deep, deep in the brain, they're all about survival. So, for example, fear comes up when you need predictability and you need safety. And if those aren't there, you feel frightened. And if it's severe, you feel terrified. The separation, distress, and sadness is we need relational connections to people. We don't get that. You get sad, or if it's more subtle, like a separation distress, an utsy feeling. Um, Anger is about agency. It means it's about embodied empowerment, the need to have your fundamental needs met. And when those needs are not being met, it's understandable that anger arises. Initially, it's like frustration, irritation, anger. And obviously, if it gets intense, it turns into fury and rage. So people are afraid of rage because rage and fury, those can be very destructive, intense expressions that are out of control of anger. But anger by itself is a very constructive emotion we need to tell our parents. So if someone says, I'm angry, it means there is a wrong that needs to be righted. So on a personal level, it can be, I'm needing to have a breathing and someone's choking me. I'm angry about that. If someone's stepping on my foot, I'm angry that they keep on repeatedly stepping on my foot. That hurts. Anger is a protective emotion. It's really, really healthy, super positive. But in interpreting it as, oh my God, it's the gateway to fury and violence, then people understandably get nervous about it. So you want to clarify that, anger begins as a very protective emotion. Even when you look at how it goes up higher in the brain, it's a very, outwardly, I'm angry like that, where sadness goes inward, fear goes inward. And that can be, distressing for a lot of people. Now, if you as a parent, like in my case, now I'm allowed to talk about it, but I wasn't before this year, and my mom gave me permission. But in my family, I had a father who was a rageaholic. And so anger was a hard emotion for me to deal with inside of myself and in my kids. It really got me agitated because when my father would get angry, in quotes, it was fury out of control. And he would never remember what he did in these rage attacks. And afterwards, he would deny. When you said, why did you throw the pot of stew onto the ceiling? He goes, I didn't do that. Your brother did that. My brother didn't do that. You did it. No, I didn't. You're crazy. It'd be insane. It'd be like a lunatic asylum. But so you could feel the beginning of frustration, anger, and it would turn to rage in about 2 seconds. So for me, I have a historical, reason to get agitated with anger. But in general, I think people have made it a universal thing, like anger is bad. So anger is a really healthy emotion. It says, I am going to stand up for what's right and try to right a wrong, And so we don't want to snuff it out. We don't want to get rid of it. We want to allow a child, as parents, teach a child how to feel that anger. I feel there's an injustice. That kid is being bullied at school. I'm angry about it. Okay, well, how are you going to take the energy to right a wrong? Well, maybe you should go to the teacher and tell the teacher. Maybe you can try just telling the other kids doing the bullying. That's not right what you're doing. Bullying is a good example because you see a lot of kids cave in, and the proper response to seeing bullying is to be angry about it. I'm angry that kid or myself is being hurt, and I'm going to right the wrong. So, so that's with the anger piece. That's what I would suggest to people. See, what did it mean for them in their own lives? And unfortunately, I'm not alone. There's so many people when I tell the story these days, my rageaholic father, I'm looking at a picture of him here right now, it was hard. Or even in my own experience as a teacher, I wanted to talk about it, and my mom made me promise I wouldn't, because many of her friends were therapists and they were my students, and she didn't want them coming back to her saying, why did you let your husband go wild with your children? So she just passed at 95 and a half. My dad died a long time ago, but she recently said, all my friends who are therapists are gone now. And now I'm about to go. So you have at it. You go, you say whatever you want. And it's been freeing to be able to share that, because I think a lot of us have certain things in our histories that are, things that when we share it with other people, people can be liberated. To realize
and I
they're not
appreciate
alone.
you sharing it. I wanted to ask you, since we're in the throes of this, right? I told you we've got a kid turning 16 soon, and we've got a 13-year-old.
Yeah.
I love your work in the book Brainstorm, where you really start talking
No,
about
thank
the
you.
teenage brain. And as so many of our listeners, so many of my clients that I'm helping, it is a lot with anxious teenagers, angry teenagers, right? And I'd really love for you to talk to them about what is so different about the teenage brain, and how they, it does mirror a lot of those toddler years to some extent, to where they're slipping back down their brain, and the emotions are definitely much more intense. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to help parents understand those teenage years, instead of it being a scary time, to where it can be a really beautiful time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, when I wrote Brainstorm, I had two adolescents in my two kids were adolescents then. And so I initially wanted to write it
Mm,
with my daughter because I thought it'd be cool to have an
that would be.
adolescent voice. And then she was so good. We actually were going to write it together, and she was so good. She said, "Dad, it doesn't make any sense for an adolescent to write a book about being an adolescent with her dad. It just makes no sense. So I am going to bust out of my contract and not
Yes.
not do it." It
Uh,
was perfect. She's an amazing human being. Uh, God, we just love both our kids so much. Anyway, they're both now in their 30s. Um, so, but the initial idea was to
yes.
speak
Yeah.
directly to adolescents. So now I had a project that I was going to write with my adolescent daughter, and now she's off the project. So I said, well, so then I said, okay, well, maybe I'll write the book for both parents and adolescents. On
Yep.
the left side, like
Yep.
it'll be for adolescents. The right side will be for parents. And I tried that for a little bit. It was nauseating. It just didn't work. So then I said, well, I am an adolescent
Yes.
therapist. I treat teenagers all the time and older, people in their mid to early to mid 20s. So I said, why don't I, channel my ability to communicate directly, but also I work with parents. So I made the book written toward an adolescent, meaning 12 to late 20s, um, and see how it goes. So then I realized I'm kind of an acronym nut. There was an acronym that could address the adolescent brain changes and be kind of memorable, which is the word
Yes. Yeah.
essence. So, so in terms of your question about
Yeah.
emotionality, so the basic thing to say about the adolescent brain is if you think about birth, let's say to 12, just to give a rough sense of numbers, and it depends on the culture you're in and food people are eating, stuff like that, the timing. But let's just do, in a lot of Western cultures, let's say 0 to 12, the brain is basically accumulating more and more
Hmm.
connections because when you learn, you make more connections. And that's cool. But then what happens right before adolescence begins, and this isn't the same as puberty, which is sexual maturation. So those are two different things, is the brain begins a process of
Mm.
remodeling itself. So if you think about the first 12 years as construction. Now you've constructed something that's the 12-year-old brain, but now
Oh,
you're going to
wow. Yeah.
remodel it. Right. So that's the first thing to say about what we now understand about brain development. Now, the remodeling consists of two processes. The first part, which really starts, some people say pre-adolescence, but certainly when adolescence begins into the middle of adolescence and continues in various ways, but it's really in this first half, if you want to say it that way. There's really there's beginning, middle, and end, but is a
Yeah.
pruning process. So you're going to start to remove the connections that the younger child has established. Now you say, what's the point of doing that? Well, the way information processing happens with all the connections that were established in the first 12 years of life, it's not so efficient. So when you start removing those connections you don't need, you basically are channeling the energy flow and making it more
Mm. Yeah.
efficient, believe it or not. So that's the reason is you're differentiating aspects of the brain. So it's influenced by experience. So what I say to kids in middle school and high school, I said, you're the one in charge of your brain development. Because if you just want to stay on a screen and use your thumb to do, the little clicking on your mouse, you'll develop that part of your brain. But if you want to develop other parts of your brain, be with your friends, do, sports, do art, learn foreign languages, challenge your brain in all sorts of ways because it's a use it
Yeah.
or lose it principle on what gets pruned away. So stress will increase pruning. So this becomes very important for understanding why certain psychiatric disorders first
Yeah.
emerge during adolescence, because you get dysregulated. That creates more stress, that creates more pruning. And it's the pruning process, which is probably why we see a lot of shifts in emotional regulation challenges during that time. It's not about raging hormones. There's no such thing as a hormone that rages. It's about brain remodeling, and the pruning is the biggest issue. Then in the second part of adolescence, you're now going to boost how you're going to increase the connection among the remaining neurons by laying down something called myelin. Myelin is like a sheath that lets neurons communicate with each other much more efficiently and effectively and quick. So by middle adolescence, that myelin formation is allowing them to do all sorts of things in incredible ways. You see this in gymnastics. So if a kid is going to learn a sport to be, let's say, in the Olympics, they're going to learn that sport before adolescence starts, because then the myelin that's going to lay down that allows them to do things thousands of times more efficiently and effective than you can, because you didn't lay down the myelin for that skill. That's when it gets laid down. So that's why we want to really honor this as an incredible opportunity for brain development. But the ES of essence means emotional spark. And the way the brain remodeling is happening is that emotions are just more intense. They happen more abruptly. They last with a more intensity. And so teaching kids to surf those emotions during this time, which I try to do in the gray pages of the Brainstorm book, is so important to do, because they're going to be more intense. And studies show that, and I used to always make a joke that the research shows if I come home and I'm there, and then my daughter or son come home in the middle of their teenage years, and I go, hi, they may go, what do you mean by that? In this big reaction. I said, I just said hi, and because there is a leaning a bit towards interpreting a neutral statement like hi as negative. And I didn't make a big deal of it. I didn't say, oh, your amygdala is interpreting my
they would
neutral
love
comment.
that. They would love it if you said that. They'd be like, thanks,
I know
Dad.
that'd be perfect parenting there. So, but that's the emotional spark. You got to realize it's just about the remodeling of the brain and the way that changes and the connections are happening. So that's the emotional spark. SE is social engagement. Adolescents have a drive now not to so much turn to their parents for support, but to their peers. And that's a natural thing in other species too. There's a Barbara Natterson Horowitz wrote a beautiful book called The Wildhood with her colleague. And it shows it's in other species as well. So it's a natural thing to try to get with your peers more. And that's the social engagement. And we want to honor that while we're also staying present in their lives. Maintaining the lines of connection while they're exploring a world beyond home is so important. So that's social engagement. ESSE, the N is novelty seeking. What happens in the brain, two things. One is the molecule that helps you feel reward is called dopamine, and dopamine levels change in significant ways. The agreed upon factor is that the release levels of dopamine for an adolescent are much higher than for an adult or for a younger child. A more controversial is the baseline level of dopamine lower also. Put those together. If the baseline level is lower in general in adolescence, but let's say in your adolescence, it means they're going to feel a little depressed. They're going to feel a little out of it. And they want to get that dopamine boost to feel reward. And then they're going to get a bigger hit once they do something. The biggest thing to release dopamine is novelty. So they get tired with doing the same thing.
They get bored quick.
Over and over again.
That's right. Yes.
They're really bored. They're bored. I don't want to be bored. Give me
Yeah.
something new. Well, doing dangerous things really
Risky stuff.
gets your dopamine going.
Yeah.
Risky stuff. So especially when they're around other peers. And that's why, at least in California, we have a rule that when you learn to drive at 16, you cannot drive with a peer in your car until you're 17, until you've been driving for a year. So that's a research finding. And the other thing, because I said there are two things. One is the dopamine business. The other thing is there's something called, and I know it's going to sound strange, but it's called hyper rational
Mm.
reasoning. And people say, no, you got that wrong. It's
That's right. It's
less
hyper
rational.
irrational reasoning.
But here's the rationality. This is a
Yeah.
sad story, but
Yeah.
this is a true story. But, one of my favorite professors was killed. I start
Yeah.
the book with this story by an adolescent who was driving about 100 miles an hour on a surface street. And he had crashed a car 2 months earlier, and his parents just got him another car.
Yeah.
One of these racing,
Yep.
sports cars. So here's the hyper-rational thinking. You say to an adolescent, here's a car. What do you want to do with it? Oh, I think I'm going to drive at 100 miles an hour on a surface street. Oh, what are the chances of you getting hurt? Oh, the chances of me getting hurt are maybe 40%. Now, let's say the chances of them getting hurt are really 10%. But they say, no, 40%. And then you go, so what are you going to do? They go, I'm going to drive 100 miles an hour. They go, why? Because here's the hyper-rational part. 40% is less than 50%. And so if the likelihood is I won't have a problem, then I'm going to do it. Because I'm going to emphasize the exciting thing of driving 100 miles an hour. Now you may go, hold on. You still have a big chance of 40% of getting hurt. But they still say, here's the hyper-rational sentence. The most likely outcome is nothing bad will happen. It's true. 60% means most likely, right? Because it's over 50%. So that's the reasoning. It's nuts, but it's what gets adolescents truly. It's not a myth. There are a lot of myths about raging hormones and all these other things, being a terrible period of life. No, those are myths, but this is not a myth. Adolescents are more likely, even though their body is stronger and healthier than any other time of life, more likely to get physically injured or die based on what an adolescent chose to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's just true. So what I try to teach is that reasoning is happening up here, the hyper-rational reasoning. So you want to teach this inner compass so their heart and their gut will tell them, I can think it would be exciting to do it. My thinking brain actually wants to do that. I think my friends will think it's cool, but my heart is telling me it just doesn't feel right. Because the heart and the gut are a whole different way of reasoning and what to do. And the final one is Essence CE, creative engagement. This is this opportunity that we have where adolescents can think outside the box. They, in all cultures, will do things a little differently. Part of it may be the novelty, but here what they're doing is they're really saying, I see how things are, but I can imagine how they could be. And as adults, we kind of settle into accepting the status quo, and this is just the way it is. But the adolescent creative exploration that they really can get involved in, the CE, is so important because it allows them to make a new world that we all need. So that's it. Emotional spark, social engagement, novelty seeking, creative exploration. It's the way the adolescent brain remodeling really sets up adolescents for a fabulous future life. And in fact, we all should try to hold on to that essence into our adulthood.
I love that.
So if I'm sitting here as a parent, which I am, of a couple teenagers, and I'm thinking, okay, there's so much, right? There's so much I want to take and absorb and do. But if I think, all right, this is where I should, if I'm new to this, or if I'm trying to wrap my head around it, what are some things that I should focus on? Or what are some, where would I start, or what should I kind of use as my baseline if I want to make sure I'm doing this with my teenagers? What would those be?
Yeah. Well, keeping the lines of communication open are so important. In Brainstorm, I have a whole section at the end about exactly how to do that. And in the gray pages of Brainstorm, you'll see exercises you yourself can do, and certainly your adolescent can do them. And they help you develop an inner compass. They help you develop a way of dealing with your emotions and learning to surf those waves. And they help you have relationships that you yourself can have with your adolescent, and that your adolescent can have with you and with their friends. So, I mean, there are absolutely things to do. The wonderful thing about it is you have an opportunity as a parent of an adolescent to take a deep breath. First of all, think about what your adolescence was like. because sometimes parents haven't thought about that, and all they want to do is make sure
Yeah,
their adolescent doesn't
exactly.
do
Yeah.
what they
Yep.
did, or
Yep.
that's a problem.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost like they're almost like they're
'Cause it's
reparenting themselves as an adolescent. They don't even really know their own adolescence. Right. Yeah.
exactly. Well, exactly. So it's a beautiful time of life, and I know so many parents say, "Oh my God, I hope we just get through this okay." And I get that. I get that. But it doesn't have to be a mystery. And you can stay connected to your adolescent. That's so important to do while they're learning how to
Yeah,
be out
I
in the
love this.
That's
world.
right.
Can you wrap us up with this? And I know this is a big question, but if you could, the thing I wanted to end with is something that also blew my mind in reading your work was this idea of we grew up all the time is it nature or is it nurture, which is the more powerful thing, right? And then you
Mm.
come out like you do, Dan, and you say this crazy thing where if I'm quoting you right, where you say it's actually nurture informs how nature presents itself or how it develops. Right? Maybe I'm saying like,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah,
I've said that to
exactly.
a lot of my clients, but I'd love to hear what do you mean by that? Because I think it's such a powerful concept. It gets us out of that dichotomous where I hear a lot of parents go, "Oh, he's got ADHD, so that's not anything we did," or "He's got anxiety. It sounds like he's had that since he was born, like he was in the womb anxious, and like there's nothing I did." And I want to say, no, if you didn't do anything to, then there's nothing we can do to help him, right? We got to like get somebody outside. So a lot of times I feel like it's this misunderstanding that the parent, not to blame, but that we did have an impact on helping develop this thing, right? So if you could just share your thoughts on that nature versus nurture debate.
Yeah. Well, but Kyle, you're really pointing out an important issue, which is as parents, we want
Yeah,
to do the best we can. And we understandably are very sensitive to feeling
yeah,
like we messed up. And if our child is having something challenging going on, like they can't focus attention or their emotions are out of control, or they're feeling like wanting to
yeah,
hurt themselves, or
yeah,
they're alienated, lonely. I mean, all things that kids can feel these days. It's important to take a deep breath and own that you wish you could have done it better, and you hope what you did
yeah,
didn't hurt your child. So that's
yep,
just a place to start. But even if what you did hurt them, then it's better to be aware of that and then own that, make a reconnection, repair. But often it's a more
yeah,
complicated story, than that. So the nature nurture story, the word nature is the idea that we have a body. The body has a genetic background. It has temperament, that some of which is genetic, some is just the innate way the brain responds. So that's the nature part. The nurture is our interactions and the behaviors that we offer, the experiences that we can help cultivate. Um, so when we say nature needs nurture, it's that our bodies need connection, right? And this connection is what our body's expecting to have. And when that kind of connection doesn't happen, things can go
yeah,
not so well. Now, that's, that nature
yeah,
needs nurture. Now, what nurture does, it helps work with the nature. So, for example, in this work on temperament, the idea is that we have lots of different aspects of temperament, but you as a parent may not have been responsible for your child's temperament, like being prone to
yeah,
anxiety, for example, but how you parent that particular child with that particular temperament is going to shape how they learn to
yep,
know themselves, to feel their feelings, help regulate their anxiety, for example. So there's a beautiful study by the father of child psychology, Jerome Kagan. What that show was, let's say you have a kid who's really prone to being nervous about new situations, and they hold back like this. Some people call them reactive child, or a behaviorally inhibited child, or
yeah,
a shy child. Those are roughly the same thing. What Kagan's research beautifully showed was that how you parent that child will determine, when that child is in their early 20s, whether they now have overcome behaviorally their nervousness about new situations. But when you put them in a brain scanner, even the ones who have overcome it, they still have that bigger reaction like the other highly reactive kids have also. So what that shows is that parenting helps you, in a sense, develop the higher parts of the brain, the upstairs brain, Tina and I would call it, that are regulating the lower parts, even if the lower parts, like the brainstem and other regions still have their natural part of nature propensity. Nurture has helped them learn to regulate their nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And that's
Yeah.
what research has shown. So it isn't that one temperament or the other
Yeah.
is better. It's you as a parent have a wonderful opportunity to get to know your child's temperament and then parent them according to their temperament.
That's so powerful.
Yeah, that's great.
I appreciate you giving that distinction, because I really think that also sums up everything we're trying to do on this podcast, is try to equip these parents to be able to have the skills, the wisdom on how to nurture the nature that's so beautifully already there, and then to bring out the
Exactly.
best of
Yeah.
that nature. The most beautiful aspects of. So I
Exactly.
love that. I thank you, Dan. It has been so amazing to get to spend this time with you, and I know our listeners are going to be like, it's writing so many notes, just being like, man, where else do I get more of this info? This is great. So, can you tell them, if they want to know more about your work, where can they find you?
Yeah. The best starting place would be drdansiegel.com. So drdansiegel.com. And you'll find a bunch of links there to different videos and stuff like that. There's also, if you want to take courses, we have a school called the Mindsight Institute, MINDSIGHT Institute. And that's mostly for professionals, but there are some parenting resources.
I love it.
there
And
too.
they definitely need to go on YouTube and find you doing the hand brain. They need to figure out, they need to get the hand brain, because the hand brain it's a tool, Dan, I teach every parent and every kid I help.
Yeah,
So
our kids have known it since they were little
that's great.
bitty.
I'll share one story that I think will really touch you. I remember when our kids, we taught it when they were very young. I got in the car. My son was maybe 6, maybe 7 at the time. And I got in the car. He sits in the back seat, and the car was kind of messy. And I typically keep my car really clean. And I looked back and saw this mess. And I said, what is going on here? Why are you guys leaving this trash in the car? And he looks at me, holds up his hand. And for those who are watching us on YouTube, you'll see he puts his hand like this. Dad, are you here right now? Are you here? Like, I know maybe you don't think we love you, or maybe you're taking it personal, but it had nothing to do with you. We just forgot to take it out of the car. And he said, and I looked at him, I said, son, that is so true. Because that's kind of what I'm saying to you, is like, you did this to me. Like, somehow you personally attacked me.
Yeah.
And it's really, you just forgot. And he's like, so we'll get it when we get out. And I thought, we're doing something right here, because my son in that moment didn't take my anger personally. He knew about me. And
There you go. That's beautiful. Exactly. He could see you were doing a Jack in the Box.
Well, and the kids would lots of, Dad, you're flipping your lid. They would say all that stuff just like you say.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
it was
good.
so fun to see them not only understand it, but then use it appropriately. And so it's, I love teaching kids. I love having kids who maybe are having a hard time understanding their emotions, to say, hey, here's how to watch your mom and dad, see where they're at in the brain. And then they're really good at noticing that. They're like, I feel like my parents are in that middle part a lot,
Fantastic.
And so it really helps them better understand themselves. So check that video out. And I just want once again say thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
And appreciate all the wisdom. So
My pleasure.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Kyle. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
The Art of Raising Humans podcast should not be considered or used as counseling, but for educational purposes only.